This video is sponsored by Hero Forge, but a bit more about them later in the video.
It's tabletop time. I'm Murray.
And I'm Jen.
And today we're going to be doing board games. Let's go. The mines, we're thinking of just doing the inverse, just a little raised edge so we can create the idea of like an open cut mine.
Yeah. I want to try and get cotton wool and try and make like the little tiny sheep.
Forests, we're going to get some of the beefier flock. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
We have a plan. Haha. Jen's got some pigments. We're going to mix some colours.
Definitely looks like Australian clay that you find in the backyard that you get all over your shoes and it's the worst thing in the world.
Oh yeah.
Some water. Mixy.
Wow, that looks perfect. Time to go apply it.
So with our sculpted all ready to go and with the pigment powders we wanted to use all mixed in, it was time to put them on our Catan tiles. We were a little bit worried that putting this wet compound onto a paper tile could result in, well, it turning into mush. We tried our best to make sure that it was spread evenly, but still had the peaks and dips where it needed to be shown.
Now, even if the mountains are objectively the easiest to do, that means that you need to get them right. If they don't read immediately as mountains, you've stuffed up. Now for the remainder of the tiles, shall we say the more fertile tiles, we just gave them a quick little very thin coat of the Sculpt-It just to give it some texture and to basically apply some simple dirt effect.
Once we were happy with how everything was looking, it was time to take our little pizza-shaped bases and put them outside to dry for a couple of hours.
A big thank you today to our sponsor, Hero Forge. Hero Forge is an online website which allows you to create an avatar for your perfect character. You have a wide and ever-expanding collection of faces, races, and maces, including swords, bows, guns, and any other kind of clothing that you could desire. You can download your characters as STL files to print yourself. You can have them printed and sent out to you in a variety of materials, and they also support online features, allowing you to upload your character into such programs as Tabletop Simulator.
Hero Forge is holding an epic Black Friday sale to get you started. There's $5 off a range of physical printed miniatures with the code LOOTDROP, and STLs that are currently only $3.99. Go to the website for great deals and fantastic hero building tools now. One of my favorite features is being able to pose my characters however I want. They're completely dynamic and you can make them incredibly individual and create their own personalities. Hero Forge isn't just for D&D. In today's video, we are making our robber. So originally is a meeple, but we decided to give him a little bit more character. And the way that Dave has done him, I think we do him justice. So again, a big thank you to Hero Forge for sponsoring for today's video, and check out the links in the description below.
So in a similar manner to how I did it in the Age of Sigmar board we built, I tried to make rows of wheat. However, this did not go well, and I ended up doing a different approach. Sometimes you just have to try all the avenues. The biggest issue I found was that I just couldn't get a single neat row of brush bristles to form. I tried multiple ways of using different clips, fingers, clamps, but they all just smooshed everything into a very thin line, which just didn't have the same effect. So I decided to scrap the idea and go for something a bit more clumpy. So in the end, for the wheat tiles, I decided to use the actual box art for inspiration on how to go about it. And I decided to go for a more yellowed, almost a dead grass look. So I marked out fields of wheat on the tiles and then just heavily applied PVA and the flock to them. This had a really nice effect, and I made sure to double up the flock and just push it in gently with my hand to make sure that it had a really nice thick coating. Now, to give the impression that some of these wheat fields have already been harvested, I'm going to make a couple of hay stacks. I'm going to do this by just grabbing some simple clay and forming it into a mound shape, which I'll then coat with PVA and in the same way apply the flock. Then for a bit of contrast, I'm just going to edge some of the corners furthest from the wheat using some simple green grass flock. Now they're sculpted all dry, some of the colours just lost a bit of their luster. So I went over them with some contrast paints and washes just to bring back a bit of their luster and vibrance. Now in the artwork for the clay tiles, there's all these miners scaffolding and towers built up around the artwork. And I decided that that might be worth replicating. So I grabbed some matchsticks, which felt a bit chunky. So I set about making them even thinner, which was some very fiddly work, and set about making some simple scaffolding using some balsa wood. Ah, it's so cute. Time to make some more. After giving all the scaffolding in the project a bit of a quick brown wash, I went about setting up where they would be on the tiles. But before I glue them in, I decided to give all the pieces just a little bit of a dry brush, just to catch all the peaks and show a bit more depth and volume in them. As an added touch, I go in and paint in some of the holes, the actual mine entrances. Then I decide to go in with an even finer brush and just track in some of the actual railroad tracks for the mine carts that would be sent into these mines. I think that adds just a bit of activity and life into these pieces. Much as I had applied contrast onto the clay tiles, I did the same with the mountains, this time applied with an airbrush, just to get these nice gradients going down the mountainsides. Then again, I followed up with a quick dry brush, going with darker greys and then towards the peaks going with a brighter white. By doing so, I'm going to try and give the illusion that the peaks of the mountains are capped with snow. They look amazing and I'm quite happy with them, however I think I can push the peaks just a bit further. So, I want to replicate snow, why don't I just add a bit of snow effect? I think it could add a really nice texture and make these stand out just a bit more than just simple grey tiles. Much in the same way as I had built the scaffolding for the clay tiles, I decided to create stems, or rather tree trunks, for our forest. I did this by using matchsticks and toothpicks, which would have a nice gradient towards the top of them. Then as you can see, I washed all these at the same time as the scaffolding. In honesty, I think I could have gotten a better effect by using a paintbrush, but the airbrush was quite good at just applying everything very quickly. It depends how much you want to get done in a certain amount of time, really. Then I set about dipping at the ends of my trees into just some craft glue. I wanted to have a very chunky and sticky glue that wouldn't go anywhere too quickly. Then I dunked in my special mix of flock and foliage. And not too bad if I do say so myself. It's very recognizable as a tree. That's perfect. Just need to make a lot of them. My main thoughts when basing the forest tiles is that I want them to be very lush and vibrant, but I don't want to compete with the plains too much. The sheep fields should be the most incredible and lush green, so I'm going to keep these ones just a little bit darker. Also, once again, making sure to use the finer materials to, again, differentiate between the ground and the foliage of the trees. In much the same way as the wheat fields, hoping that this helps differentiate the trees and the ground. I wanted to give the idea that there was a big cluster of trees in the centre, forming our forest. Again, this is representative, or rather a caricature of a forest, rather than a realistic one. That's the approach that we want to go with. The desert itself was pretty simple, just a bit of a dry brush job. Again, just going for that maximum readability.
So we had toyed around with the idea of creating little fluffy sheep that we could put on our wool tile. There were a couple of ways I wanted to achieve this, but I thought the best method would be trying some felting. I've done felting once or twice before, so I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. The problem this time around though was trying to make it small enough, but also big enough that it would be shown on the tile. To get started, I grabbed a bit of the white felting and the black to make the little sheep body and its head. Once I was happy with the size, I felted these together to make the actual sheep itself. Once I was happy with how the body was looking, I also felted in just 2 little ears to make it look more like a sheep. Originally it was looking a lot like an eyeball and it was a bit creepy, so we decided to add some ears in to make it look a lot more animal than eyeball-y. Leaving my sheep to the side for now, it was time to dry brush these tiles, and I was really happy with how the sculpted turned out on all of the Catan pieces. Dry brushing these just gave a little bit more texture and made them really pop. For the fill pieces, I definitely wanted to include some flowers in the scene. I grabbed a couple of the gamer's grass flowers we have around the studio and cut these up into smaller pieces. I then set these into place with a tiny bit of super glue just to make sure they stuck nicely. I was happy with how my flowers were looking for now, but wanted to add a bit more later, but decided to move on to some grass. Once I was happy with how these were looking, I added on just a couple more flowers to give it more of a field look, and then added on my adorable little fluffy sheep. Next up was moving on to these water tiles. Now these go around the Catan board, and I wanted to include a little bit of texture to them. The first thing I wanted to do was lay down some sand on the actual beaches. I did this by using a compound of glue and water, and then sprinkling some sand on top and leaving this to dry for a while. Once this was dry, I went over the top with a Citadel wash just to bring out more of a yellow sandy colour. Afterwards, I dry brushed on top just to make sure that sand texture was really showing through. I also added in a couple of rocks for variety because these were initially in the original tiles, so I wanted to include these in. Now that my sand was all dry, it was time to start doing the water effects on these water tiles. So I picked up a bottle of Woodland Scenics water effects. You guys have seen me use this before on my Celestine base, and I used it in pretty much a similar method. It comes out as a white paste that you sort of need to manipulate and peak upwards to make the waves. Using a previous brush that we had destroyed allowed me to keep these peaks looking nice and peaky. I did this twice just to ensure that they kept their shape. Once my water effects had 24 hours to dry, it was time to put on some waves. This is a similar type of paste that you use, but this time comes out clear instead of white. I use this in between the water effects to give the illusion of rippling water. Once everything was dry and looking pretty good, I decided I wanted to include some of the cartooniness we had in our other tiles. To do this, I gave everything just a really quick dry brush of a bright white. This gave a bit of shape and form to the waves and let them stand out a little bit more.
Now, I didn't want to leave the little houses and cities for Catan alone. I wanted to add a little bit more to them as well. So I decided to grab a white house and a red city just to do them up a little bit, make them a bit special. Dave and I were chatting over it, and we decided that the white would lend to a really nice, almost medieval Tudor style house, the sort of whitewashed walls with the wooden support beams everywhere. For the thatching, I used brush hairs glued on in bunches and then gave it a bit of a wash with a brown just to give it a bit more depth. However, it wasn't really thick enough, so I went in and put a second layer on, which I think helped bulk it out quite a lot. Then I used scissors to just neaten it up a bit. City, I mixed together some browns and blues to create this weird dark grimy colour that I would use to make a tiled roof and also to give the outlines of some of the bricks. I also want to have a whole lot of windows on this, sort of slit-like and intimidating. This is supposed to be cute but also maybe a bit industrially grim. Final touch, my factory wouldn't be complete without some smokestacks, so I cut up some matchsticks and just gently put them on and gave them a lick of paint. The sheep looked fantastic that Jen had made, and they just immediately communicated the resource that was on them, whereas the other tiles, maybe not so much. So I'm gonna just make some cute little chibi resources to immediately show what each tile is representing. So I'm gonna start with some milliput bricks. Sort piles were clearly a must, and by using the same matchsticks that I used for the tree trunks in the first place, I immediately had the right size. So I just glued them into stacks and gave them a quick wash. I was pretty happy with the hay stacks that were already on the tiles, but some actual baled heaps of wheat, that would be perfect. And I'm not gonna lie, this was very painful and fiddly. Jetties, I used some strips of balsa wood and then with a knife just scored lines to represent planking. Then again, gave it another wash. This is all turning out quite well. I think it's time for a bit of a reveal.
And as always, just a huge thank you to all of our Patreons who inspire us to make awesome videos like this one. A big thank you to Quilton, Techno Joe, and Abby Taylor for joining the Mini Club crew. Really appreciate your support, and if you would like to join, links are in the description below.
We're done.
We're done!
This looks amazing.
I agree. This is actually something I've wanted to do for a really long time, and I'm so glad we got the opportunity to do this because this is just like a sensory joy. Like, there is so much fun stuff to touch on these.
Yeah, it's a little wilderness all to its own. I hope you enjoyed our little foray into taking an existing board game and just adding upon it.
Maybe there's another board game you'd like for us to explore. Leave your suggestions in the comments below. Maybe we could do like a Candyland or Mousetrap or something.
Hey, yeah. Extreme Connect 4.
Yeah.
Maybe not.